All right. So I'm going to pick up with this idea of taking a graph and turning that into an equation. Right? We touched on this on Friday. So to do that, we want to start by identifying the three key features for our sinusoid. Remember that term sinusoid just means one of these wavy up and down graphs. The three key features are midline, amplitude, and period. Let's take a look at this first graph here on the left. Who can tell me what the midline is for this graph?
-3.
It's not negative.
-1.
-1, right. So this guy right here is our midline. Okay. Who can tell me what the amplitude is?
1.
It is.
-2.
It's 2.
Why is it?
So again, it's the distance from midline to extrema. And then what's the period going to be?
4 for X.
None of those. So let's start by identifying one cycle. So that's like one cycle of our graph, right? Okay. That cycle starts at the x value of 0 and ends at the x value of pi. So the period is
I thought that was X.
pi. Everybody's okay there? Yes.
So on these graphs, why is the x-axis got pi and not like just numbers?
Because typically when we graph trig functions, we use radians as the inputs, because putting 6 tick marks for pi is a lot less than putting 360 tick marks for degrees.
How does degrees relate to the graph?
Because you're asking for a number on the x-axis, which would mean using degrees. So to get one full cycle, you need 360 tick marks, which yuckarooskies. That's why we use radians more often than not. All right. So y equals 1. That tells me about which coefficient in my equation. So when I say equation, I mean like, I'm just going to write trig instead of sine or cosine because we don't know which one we'd want to use yet. Y equals 1 tells me about the A, the C, the H, or the K. Nope. The y equals 1 tells me about which one, A, C, H, or K.
A. No, K.
It is the K. The K is, the midline is just y equals K. So whatever the value for the midline is, that's your K. What does the amplitude tell us about A, C, or H? A, very good. If the amplitude is 2, what does A have to be?
2.
Close. Plus or minus 2. So again, that amplitude is the absolute value of A. So if all we know is the amplitude, A could have been positive or negative. And the period, does that tell me about C or H? Nope. C. Because I know that the period is equal to 2 pi times the absolute value of C. So if I know pi is equal to 2 pi times the absolute value of C, what does C have to be? Yeah. if pi is equal to 2 pi times the absolute value of c, what is c? So to solve the equation, you divide both sides by 2 pi. So the absolute value of c is equal to?
2.
Nope. Nope.
C.
Absolute value of c.
1/2 pi divided by 2 pi. 1/2. Right?
My brain is
Cancel, cancel. 1/2. Right?
Okay.
I remember it now.
Yeah?
So why is pi equal to 2 pi absolute value of C?
Because pi is the period. The period is 2 pi times the absolute value of c.
Okay, so to solve for the period, you find.
Nope. To solve for the period, we looked at the graph.
Yeah.
To solve for c, we take the period and set it equal to 2 pi times c.
Okay.
Now, c then would be plus or minus 1/2, but what did I tell you about the c's? Always we're going to use the positive. Always use the positive for c. All right. Next, how did I tell you guys on Friday to choose whether we should be writing a sine or cosine equation? We look at what the graph is doing at x equals 0. So notice at x equals 0, we are at a relative extrema, right? A minimum? Everybody agree?
Yep.
Does that mean I use sine or cosine? Hi. She's absent. The fact there's a minimum there at x equals 0, does that tell me I should be using sine or cosine?
Cosine.
Yes. Mins and maxes are cosine. Midline points are sine. So I'm going to use cosine. And because this is a minimum, what's that telling me about the a? Should it be positive or negative?
Can you say again how you know if it's cosine or sine?
Yes. Mins and maxes are cosine. Midline point is sine. How do I know what a is? Is a positive or negative? The fact it's a minimum should tell me. It is negative. Minimum means negative for a. So we'd write y equals -2 cosine. Now 1/c means the reciprocal, right? So the reciprocal of c is 2. We don't need an h in this case. And then -1. Is everybody okay so far? Now remember on the video on Friday where I showed you the graph of sine and cosine, right? And we said they're both these waves, like that. I should be able to write this also as a sine function then as well. Let's show you how you do that. To write a sine function, I need a midline point. How many midline points do you see on here on the graph? Should see a whole heap of them, right? Any place where the graph intersects the midline is a midline point. Yeah, but how many is there really?
Infinitely.
Infinitely many, right? Because that just keeps on going in both directions. So, does it matter which one I choose, Mr. Kulik? No, but your answer will be different depending on which one you choose, but they'll all be correct. Let's say for the sake of argument, we picked this one right here. So far, so good. I just picked one arbitrarily. Nothing special about that one. So first thing I want to do is I want to write down the coordinate for that point. So I notice that it's from 0, it's 1 tick mark to the right. And from 0, I notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4 tick marks till I get to pi. So 1 tick mark must be 1/4 pi, or pi over 4. Right? If 4 tick marks make up 1 pi, 1 tick mark is 1/4 of pi. Is that okay? And I know the y coordinate is just the same as the midline. So there's my point. The x coordinate is going to give me the h. And the extrema after the midline point will tell me whether the a is positive or negative. That extrema after our midline point is a maximum. So it tells me the a is positive. Everything else, though, stayed the same. So this is y equals 2. Then I'll do sine 2x minus, my h now is pi over 4, but the k and the c still, or the 1 over c stayed the same.
So, and then you said for the trig functions that cosine is minimum and maximum, and what was the other two?
Sine is midline. So these two answers would both be correct. Let me demonstrate that for you. So there's the graph for cosine that we just wrote. There's the graph for sine. What did you notice? They're the same, right? Both answers were the same, gave you the same picture, just one right on top of the other. So they're both both answers would be correct, right? Notice that if, when x equals 0, if I don't have a maximum, minimum, midline point, I'm going to get an h. Okay? So if at x equals 0, the graph is at a max or a min or a midline point, h is 0. Otherwise, we're going to get an h. Let's look at another example. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We start by looking for our midline point. Or midline, excuse me. Where is the midline at? I think 3.
He hasn't been. Oh.
I would look at the y-axis usually as easiest to do it, but okay. What is our amplitude going to be here?
2.
So that looks like from 3 to 5. That is 2 units. Now let's find our period. Notice at x equals 0, the graph doesn't cross at a midline point or a min or a max, right? Yuck! I don't want to do that. How am I going to find that again? What I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to say start my cycle from here at the maximum, and I'll look at the end of the cycle at the next maximum. That's one cycle still, right? Everybody's okay with that? So now I need to figure out the coordinates at each of these. If I look, that min or max looks like it's halfway in between the tick marks, right? So if I count the tick marks, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 tick marks that make up a pi, so each tick mark is a quarter pi. How much would half a tick mark then be? 1/8 of pi. So this one is 1/2 of a tick mark to the left. So that'd be negative pi over 8 comma 5. And this one is, let's see, we are 2, 4, 6, and then one more, so 7 pi over 8.
So each time you go up or to the right or the left, 4, it's a pi.
Well, on this graph, it depends on what the scale is on the graph, but on this one, that's the case, right? Because if I look at the x-axis, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 tick marks, puts me at pi, right? Does that feel okay? So you might have to look at the scale. Not every graph will have the same scale. All right, so the period then is going to be the distance from negative pi over 8 to 7 pi over 8. How far is that? 1 pi. Does everybody see that? So we did 1 pi over 8 to get to 0, and then 7 more pi over 8s to get to the end. 1/8 plus 7/8 is 1. Okay. So what does the midline give us? A, C, H, or K?
Great question. Pretty sure it's K.
Yep. And what is that K? 3. Just the same as the midline. The amplitude gives us A, C, or H. A. What is the A then? Close. Plus or minus 2. That's good. We'll decide which one is which here in a minute. The period is pi. What does the period tell me? C or H? C. And if I notice here, we already had a period of pi before, right? What was the C? 1/2. So I'm not going to repeat that work to do it again. I'm just going to steal from what I've already done. Everybody's happy with that? Okay. So let's go to our graph and decide whether we're going to do a sine or cosine first. It doesn't matter. So let's do cosines first. For a cosine, I need a min or max point. Doesn't matter which one I choose. No. How many mins and maxes can I see? Infinitely many, right? But I'd be crazy not to pick one of the two that I've already identified the coordinate for, right? So let's say for the sake of argument, I'm going to pick this one. Okay? So what is the H going to be? Just the x coordinate. And is the A going to be positive or negative? Positive. Why? because what we used was a max. Excellent. So now we can put this all together. 1 over c is the reciprocal of 1/2. So there's that. Everybody okay with what I did? After I figure out my letters, I just plug them into the formula, right? The hardest part is getting the letters. Usually the H is the tricky one. So far, so good? Okay. Let's do sine then. Oops. What do I need to do a sine? Yes, sir.
Midline.
I need a midline. Great. Does it matter which midline point I use? No. How many of them are there? Infinitely many. So let's just pick one. I'm going to pick this one right here. Is that okay with everybody? What is the x coordinate at that point?
1.
Well, we've gone half of a unit over, right? 1 unit was pi over 4, so a half a unit must be pi over 8. Everybody agree with that?
Okay.
And then the y-coordinate's just on the midline, so that's 3. So the h is going to be the x-coordinate. And then is the a going to be positive or negative? It's not. So because the next extrema after is a minimum, it tells me the a is negative. So for cosines, the point you choose, whether it's min or max, will tell you what you need. For sines, you have to look at the next extrema after your midline point. Is that okay? Okay. So if I put this all together, I have y equals negative 2 sine 2 times x minus pi over 8 plus 3. And again, if I graphed both of these, they'd be the same picture. If you wanted to check it or whatever. How's this going so far? It's not so bad, right? Like there's a lot of pieces to put together, but none of them are like time-consuming pieces to put together, right? It's mostly just looking at the picture and pulling out the pieces of information that we need. Okay, so not too bad. No crazy algebra, no long solvings. We'll do one more example. What do we start with by looking for?
Midline.
Midline. Where's the midline at?
-1.
-1. That's what it looks like to me. What does that give me? A, C, H, or K? K. And what is K? -1. Next we look for is, great, what's the amplitude? Looks like 2 to me. What does that give me? A, C, or H? A. What is A going to be then? Close. Plus or minus 2. What's up? Okay. And then last we look for is? Period. Okay. So let's say we'll start here at x equals 0. That's my preference. That's good because it's at a minimum. So what x value did we start at?
0.
What did we end at? So how far is the period? Pi. Oh, that's one we know. What's the c for that? 1/2. We've done that 3 times now. Okay. Now, if you had a choice between, if I only asked you for one equation, sine or cosine, which one would be the easier one to pick? Cosine, very good. Why is that?
0.
Because at x equals 0, we have an extrema. That would be best for us because that tells me that the h is 0. And what's the a got to be, positive or negative?
Positive. Negative.
Why negative, Colby? Because it's a min. So we can put that all together. So we have negative 2 cosine 2x minus 0 minus 1. Okay. If I want to do this as a sine, what do I need? A midline point.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter which one I pick. Let's say we pick this one right here, for example. What's the x coordinate on that point? Yep. Good. Pi over 4, or 1/4 pi. And the y is just the midline, so it's negative 1. So what's my h got to be? Pi over 4, just the x coordinate from our point. Very good. And is this going to be, is the a positive or negative? So I look at the next extrema after, positive. Notice that if I had picked this one here instead, a would have been negative, right? So it just really depends on your choice there at the beginning. Is that okay? All right. One more idea that we're going to talk about today. And again, we would have done this when you guys did your delta maths, is going from a description to an equation, just words. But we're going to make that a little bit more difficult because not only are we going to give you some attributes, we're going to give you a point that the function must pass through. So our first example, we're going to do 2 examples of this. It says construct a sinusoid with an amplitude of 4, a period of 3 pi, and passes through the point 3, 1. So sinusoid means we can write either a sine or cosine equation. You have your choice. You don't have to do both. One or the other is fine. What do I get if it tells me the amplitude is 4? What does that tell me? About A, C, H, or K? Tells me about A. What does A got to be?
4.
Close.
Plus minus 4.
Thank you. Next one is it tells me the period is 3 pi. What's that telling me about? C, okay? So I know that 3 pi then is going to equal 2 pi times the absolute value of C. What do I need to do to get C by itself?
Divide by 2 pi.
Divide by 2 pi. That'll give me 3 over 2 is equal to the absolute value of C. And we know we always take the positive option out of that, so C is just going to be 3 over 2. So far, so good? What are we still missing, though?
Okay.
And
And
H. Okay? So somehow this point at the end has to supply me with both of those. Now, question for you. Does this specify where on the graph 3, 1 is? Does it have to be a midline point or a maximum or a minimum? It can be anywhere we want it to be, right? It's essentially a free point. We can assign it anywhere we want on the graph. You guys agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pick where we want it to fall on the graph. The easiest option is to choose this to be a midline point. If that's a midline point, should I be using sine or cosine?
Sine.
Sine. Mins and maxes are cosine. Midline points are sine.
Oh,
And that tells me also that the h is just the x coordinate and the k is the y coordinate. And that's all I need. Somebody should be objecting here.
you know what?
Why not? Well, I'm saying we have all we need to write the equation, but you guys still should be objecting. You don't know whether a should be positive or negative. We didn't decide that yet, did we? Guess what? In this problem, doesn't matter. Both will be correct. Let me show you why here in a moment. So that little white spot is the point 3,1. So here's our answer. Yes, sure. Here's our answer, right? See our graph going through the 3,1? That's the white point, right? Fits the criteria. It has the correct amplitude and period. If I made that 4 negative out front, I have a different picture, but does it still have the same period? Yes. The same amplitude? Yes. Does it still go through the point? Yes. Even though it's a different graph, it hits all the criteria, so it's still a correct answer, even though it's a different picture. Everybody's okay with that? Could you have written a cosine equation for this? Yes, but it's much harder, and why would you want to choose to do it the hard way? Let's just choose to do it the easy way. Deal? I won't ask you to do it the hard way.
Is it only easier for these types of questions? I thought it was cosine was easier.
So because this question, you're given the freedom to pick that point anywhere you want, you can pick it to be a sine problem and get the h and k both for free. With cosine, it's more work to get the k. Yes. Aiden. Just go, man. Colby.
Why'd you flip the C to 2 over 3?
Because it's 1 over c in the equation. So it's always a reciprocal. Going from c to the equation, it always flips. Right? Before, when we had all those 1/2s, it became a 2, right? Always made the reciprocal. Is that okay? Right? Like if I look at the equation, it's 1 over c in the equation. So whatever we find out for c, we have to flip. All right, last example. Here we're asked again for a sinusoid. So again, we have the freedom to pick whether we want to write a sine or cosine equation. Both are fine. And all we're given is a minimum and the next maximum. Mr. Gulick, I don't love that. It's not too bad. So let's just kind of sketch out a little picture of what we have. So we have our minimum here. Goes up to a maximum. If I wanted to finish my cycle, I'd end like right here or something, right? Does everybody agree with the picture I've just drawn? Okay. So if I wanted to put the midline in, the midline would be like there, right? Well, that's just going to be halfway in between the y coordinates. So I will just take the average of those y coordinates, and that'll be my k. So 42 divided by 2 is 21 for K. Yeah, sure. Do we feel okay on how I did that? Now this formula for K, you're free to use anytime you have a min and a max like this. So far, so good? Okay. What if I look at this distance? What is that distance right there? Close. It's actually 2 amplitudes, right? Because like this is an amp, and then this is an amp, right? So if I look at the distance from that min to the max, the horizontal or the vertical distance, and divide it by 2, that'll be our amplitude. So since it's a distance, we'll be subtracting. So 22 divided by 2, that tells me that our amplitude is plus or minus 11. I'm sorry, our A is plus or minus 11. Amplitude's always positive because it's a distance. But our A is plus or minus 11. Is everybody okay with that? Likewise, you can use that formula for amplitude anytime you have a max and a min. So far, so good. If I look at our picture here, how much of a cycle is that piece that we're given from min to max? Half. So guess how much of a period that is? Also half. Very good. So I know 1/2 my period is going to equal the distance from my x max to my x min. And I like to put an absolute value around it because I don't know, like my maximum could have a smaller x coordinate than my minimum. I have to get a positive number out of this for my because it's a distance. So I'll just stick an absolute value around it to guarantee that. With the y max, the y from the maximum is always bigger from the y from the minimum. So I don't have to worry about it before, but I do here. So if I multiply both sides by 2, 1 period is 2 times the distance from the x max to the x min. Right? Okay. So that's 15 minus 5, or 20, right? And what's the period again? 2 pi times the absolute value of c, then equals that 20. How do I get the c by itself? Divide by 2 pi. So if I reduce, I get 10 over pi, and we always pick the positive, so I'm going to not bother with the plus or minusing. Is everybody okay there? So we solved for the period first, and then we plugged that period into equaling 2 pi c. So far, so good? All right. The last thing we need to do is decide whether we want to write a sine or cosine function. We're given mins and maxes, so we should pick. Who said it? Say it loud and proud. Cosine. Okay. So I'm going to pick one of the 2 points now to use. Does it matter which one I pick, Mr. Kulik? No, you'll get a correct answer either way, but your answers will look different. Like the equation will be different, but they'll both be correct. Let's say, for instance, we pick the minimum at 510. The h then should be, okay, so the a is negative, but what is the h? what number is it? What's it equal? Not 510, just 5. Just the x. Just the x. So now we have everything we need. So y equals negative 11 cosine, and then we'll flip our c, so we'll have pi over 10 x minus h plus k. And just to show you guys that this indeed is a solution, so there is my 2 points, 5, 10, and then 15, 32. The blue is the equation for our negative 11, yada, yada, yada. And if I did the equation for, with using the maximum, the only thing that changes is the a becomes positive, and the h is 15 instead. If I graph that equation, I see it's the exact same graph, passes through the 2 points as needed. That's all she wrote. Does that feel okay with what we've done today? Again, the process can be kind of lengthy. There's a lot of things you have to pull out, right? But nothing is super complicated. Nothing is terribly time consuming. The individual pieces should be easy to get, right? Should be doable. For your guys' homework, I want you to work on worksheet 5. So on worksheet 5, you're given a graph and asked to write the equation using sine and then using cosine. I'll give you a second graph and ask you to write the equation using sine and cosine. That's it, 4 problems on worksheet 5. And I also want you to do worksheet 4, which is just like the example problems we just got done doing. I don't want you to do 3 because it's asking you to do a problem the hard way where you're using cosine instead of a problem where you should use sine. I don't want you to worry about that. I would never ask you to do that. So there's going to be 6 total of those. That'll be part of Sunday's problem set. In addition, what else is due Sunday? The Delta Math. If you haven't finished that, I'd recommend starting on that if it's not done yet. Get that finished because those skills are building blocks for what we're doing here in worksheets 4 and 5. But worksheets 4 and 5, do 5 first and then do 4. The graph problem should be easier than the descriptions because you have more information. You have the whole graph, right? Rather than just some part of it. You know what I'm saying? Any questions for me? Sure. Okay. You guys can take the remaining 30 minutes or so and get crack-a-lack in here, folks.